I'm a foster failure. That's what they call it when you agree to foster a dog, but end up keeping it instead of sending it to a new home. I signed up as a foster home for dogs for the same reason anyone else would. I love dogs. I spent some years being lonely, alone in a tiny town with basically no friends. I ended up wandering the local shelter in search of a friend. The shelter was having a push for people to sign up to foster, and I took the bait. People loved to dump dogs they no longer wanted in our town, and the shelter was always at or near capacity. The day I signed up, I thought the tiny blonde woman running the shelter was going to collapse with excitement. She told me not too many people signed up to foster in our town, and she was sure they'd have a placement for me within the week, once all the paperwork was processed. I waited, patiently. Within 3 days I got the call. There was a dog waiting for me. I could give this sweet dog a home until someone could come and adopt it. I stood outside the shelter, looking at the photo that had been sent to me of my new temporary companion. My phone screen was filled with the image of a large black dog that I was told had to be mixed with a Great Dane due to its size. The rest of his lineage was as clear as mud, like most dogs in the shelter. His fur was scruffy looking, and his ears were floppy. He had amber eyes that had the same wounded look as many other shelter dogs I'd seen. I walked into the shelter to see the blonde lady attaching a leash to the collar of the big black dog I was to take home. She handed me the leash and told me his name, Shadow. Shadow stood, and I realized I was wholly unprepared for his size. His back reached my hip height easily. If he would have placed his paws on my shoulder, we would have been eye to eye. His amber eyes almost seemed to glow. He didn't seem scared at all. Shadow walked up to me and sat down politely at my feet. His tail wagged furiously as he raised a paw to tap my knee. I scratched his head, and he melted beneath me. It was love at first sight. I knew somewhere inside me that he'd be my dog in the end. Before I loaded him up in my car, I was told he'd been bathed, but had a nice stray stink that seemed to be lingering despite the 2 baths he'd been given. As soon as we were in an enclosed space together, I couldn't deny it. Shadow was a smelly dude. I made a mental note to speak to a groomer or a vet. There had to be a reason for the persistent stink. As the weeks passed, I grew to love Shadow more and more. I started to believe I'd be a foster failure. He was the dog suited for me. I'd even set up a little dog camera so I could keep an eye on him while I was at work and dispense some treats from the way too expensive device attached to the wall. Eventually, some things started to strike me as odd, even scary. Shadow was wildly protective of me in a way I'd never seen from a dog. The slightest unexpected noise would cause him to jump in front of me, hackles raised and teeth exposed, ready to attack anything that may dare to cross my path. The growl, he'd admit, was otherworldly. So deep, I almost felt it in my soul. When no threat was found, Shadow would return to my side, happily wagging his tail and panting, ready to play tug-of-war. One night, about a month after I agreed to foster Shadow, I laid in my bed, nearly asleep. Shadow occupied the spot next to me. I could nearly see those amber eyes sparkling in the dark. Just as I began to fall asleep, I was jolted awake by the sound of my front door rattling. Shadow was immediately up, fur raised and teeth bared. He bolted to the living room. I grabbed a baseball bat stashed beside my bed and began creeping to the living room as I heard the door open. Someone had broken in. I heard Shadow's growl and began to round the corner. I was completely floored by what I saw. Shadow moved like a superhero, so fast I could barely see him. Before I could even say his name, his teeth were wrapped around the burglar's neck. I swore I saw his claws grow. His teeth transformed into rows of points, like a shark. Blood splattered across the room as Shadow slashed deep claw marks across the man's torso. There was no hope for the man. In what felt like the blink of an eye, he dropped to the ground. Once I got close, I could see that the robber was dead. Shadow had blood dripping from his lips. He turned to me, his eyes searching mine as he panted. He was searching for approval. He'd done a good thing. My stomach dropped. Shadow had no fear. He attacked the man like he'd done it 1,000 times before. He killed him swiftly and easily. How could a thing I loved so much do something so horrific? To add to my horror, there was now a dead man on the floor. The mangled mess in my living room couldn't feasibly have been caused by a dog attack. I felt bile rise in my throat. I was in an awful situation. I couldn't even identify all my emotions. I was somewhere between terror, misery, and even a little love mixed in there. Something in me knew for certain that Shadow wouldn't hurt me. He was protecting me, protecting our home. Maybe it was some sort of dog Stockholm syndrome. Is that a thing? I was equal parts terrified and adoring of Shadow. As I tried desperately to sort my brain out, I saw Shadow was pulling the body of the robber across our living room. He drug it all the way to our backyard. I knew what I had to do. I hate to say it, but I buried the man in our yard. What else was I going to do? No cop would believe Shadow did that. I would be to blame. Besides, even if they did believe it was Shadow, they'd take him from me. It felt like our souls had been bonded. I could not let him go. I called the shelter the next day to tell them I was officially a foster failure. I wouldn't be returning Shadow. The shelter owner forwarded me the adoption paperwork, more than happy that Shadow had a new home. Shadow spent every moment by my side. A few months after the robber incident, my doorbell rang. Fear struck me immediately. What if it was someone else that Shadow felt the need to demolish? To my shock, Shadow didn't react in his normal protective way. He looked at me, then the door, and let out an approving howl. I opened the door to find a man dressed in a business suit, with slicked back hair. He had a briefcase and a file folder. I assumed he was some sort of missionary. "Hey, buddy, I don't need Jesus, but thanks anyway," I said through the glass door.
"Oh, I know you don't."
The man chuckled. He pointed behind me to Shadow, who was glued to my side.
"I'd like to talk to you about that dog."
My heart sank. Was this his original owner? "I've adopted him already. I've got the paperwork," I said, my stomach churning at the thought of Shadow being taken from me.
"Oh, he's not mine. Well, I guess he kind of is, but I don't want him. I just want to tell you some things. May I come in?"
I hesitated, but Shadow's lack of reaction made me feel safe. I opened the door and the man came inside. He gave Shadow a pat on the head. As he sat on my couch, he muttered,
"Wow, that smell really doesn't get better up here."
He passed the file folder to me. The front read, "So, you've adopted your Hellhound." I opened it to find several pamphlets. "Squashing the sulfur, making your Hellhound smell fresh, training your Hellhound," and "Which entity are you?" flowchart inside, among many others. I'm sorry, what? Hellhound? I laughed. I couldn't help it.
"Okay, look, I am on a limited time frame here. I don't have time to let you process your shock or whatever. Somewhere in you, you know your dog isn't a normal dog. And somewhere in you, you know you aren't normal, don't you?"
He leaned forward, hands clasped. It was like his words sank into me, puzzle pieces falling into place. My lack of friends, my need for no one, Shadow being the first emotional attachment I'd ever really had, the ease with which I'd accepted Shadow murdering someone, 1,000 other tiny occurrences in my life that added up to this reality. I wasn't normal.
"He's a Hellhound. You're a... well, we don't really love the word demon, but if the shoe fits..."
He trailed off. He tapped the pamphlet that mentioned entities.
"I included that one so you can be sure. There's a slight chance you're something else, but demon is what my money is on. Your little friend here is your protector."
He pointed toward Shadow. Shadow laid peacefully at my feet. I stroked my hand down his scruffy black fur.
"My contact information is in the folder too. Ring me if you have any questions. There's lots of info in there about training, grooming, general care. If you want to keep him, I'd study up. Wouldn't want any more casualties,"
he said, pointing his eyes in the direction of my back door. He stood, bid me farewell, and was gone as quickly as he'd arrived. My world was flipped upside down in a matter of minutes. I laid on the floor next to Shadow and buried my face in the fur of the only friend I had. I gazed up at the ceiling, trying to process the fear I felt. The fear wasn't of Shadow. No, that wasn't it. It wasn't even of the strange man who just shattered my reality. No. It was fear of myself, of what I was, of what I could become, of what I knew deep down. I am meant for destruction, with my companion by my side.
Hello, listeners. If you enjoyed this story, please check out the author in the description. For more content, leave a like, comment, and subscribe for more sinister readings.